38 weeks pregnant, we just completely jumped ship and decided instead of having our baby at the hospital as planned, we were actually going to have a home birth, which was never part of the plan, especially not a part of my husband's plan. Hey everybody, I am Dr. Nicole, and this video is going to be a little bit different than my normal videos. I'm sharing something a little bit personal with you, and I'm taking off my doctor jacket today because we are actually going to be hearing a little bit more about my birth story, most specifically why we decided at 38 weeks, which is so late in the game, to have a home birth instead of a hospital birth. I think for this to all make sense, I really need to rewind a little bit and take you back to about 20 months prior when I gave birth to my first son. This was a hospital birth. It was a very normal birth, I guess you would say. It was at a hospital with an OBGYN. We did a birth course, not the hospital's birth course. We did Mama Natural's birth course. I had a lot of things in my birth wishes that were very low intervention, so I didn't want an epidural, wanted to have a vaginal birth. I really didn't want any interventions like a C-section. I was okay with forceps and vacuum if necessary, but really I just wanted it to be as natural of an experience as possible. There was a little bit of a hitch in our plans right from the get-go because at 40 weeks, 10 days, I still had no signs of labor. I don't even think she gave me like a pity centimeter of dilation. I tried having my membrane stripped and just nothing was working. I was trying all the remedies except for the induction remedy in this video. I'll put it above. This one actually worked for my sister and I wish I would have tried it, but I didn't know it at the time. So regardless, we ended up having to go to the hospital to be induced, which I was really terrified of because I knew that, you know, induction can often lead to this whole cascade of other interventions, and sometimes it makes it really hard to have that no medication vaginal delivery that I really, really wanted. Things ended up working out okay though, because when I got there to be induced, they hooked me up to the monitor to like make sure everything was gonna go okay, and I actually went into labor pretty much on my own. I started having contractions, like itty bitty happy contractions like I like to call them, but nonetheless it was labor, so that meant my body was on board with like, let's get this thing started. They ended up giving me Cervidil, I believe it's called, and which is something they insert into the vagina to open things up and get dilation going, but I never had to have any Pitocin or anything, so that was awesome. Things progressed really well. It was really only like a 12-hour labor from like that very first happy contraction to delivering my son, so all in all, like, it was a really good experience. However, there was a part that I did not love about my birth story, and it was the fact that I ended up with an episiotomy. And episiotomy in and of itself is, you know, wasn't really on my birth plan, but what really wasn't in my plan, or I had no idea was going to be a problem, was the postpartum healing. I go into my whole birth story on another video, and I think in the future I'm going to share a little bit more about what the recovery was like after my episiotomy, but the long story short was that I couldn't have sex for like 9 months. It took me a really long time to be able to exercise again. Things just really, really hurt down there because of just all the trauma that happened during the episiotomy, and I really felt like it wouldn't have had to go that way for several different reasons. I felt like nothing really was complicated about my labor and delivery. I only pushed for about 30 minutes. I don't know. My OBGYN said that my like heart rate and blood pressure were doing things they didn't want them to do, and they said that my son's heart rate was dropping, and I really don't know because I was I was in the full-on like pushing mode, so I don't know how much of an emergency it was. I am so thankful that my son is here and he's healthy, but I really just felt like, okay, with my next birth I want to do things a little bit different because yes, we all survived, but that was like a very, very not fun postpartum experience for me, and I really felt like there was better options. So fast forward to about 13 months later, when not very long, I know, we ended up getting pregnant with my second son. And I was like, you know, one thing I really want to do different here is I want to try delivering with a midwife. Now, nothing against OBGYNs. They are very fabulous at delivering babies and keeping mom alive, and they have great statistics when it comes to all that. But I just felt like me as the mom, like my health, especially my postpartum recovery, like just wasn't as considered as I wanted it to be. Even though I had a ton of great experiences with my OBGYN, I felt like I wanted something a little bit different. So I looked into different options, and luckily, locally, there are midwives in the area that deliver at the hospital. I had considered home birth because I knew traditionally midwives are mostly associated with home births. But my husband was like, I really don't feel comfortable with that. I want to be at a hospital. And I know that it's really important for my husband to feel just as comfortable as I feel during the whole birthing process, because he's my main person. He is my support guy, and I need him to feel really comfortable so he can, you know, exude or put off that energy for me. So he was like, no. And I said, okay, well, there's a way we can do it with a midwife at the hospital. This is like a perfect compromise, really. So I was really happy with the way things were going until we hit March of 2020. And I think most of you know what happened in March of 2020. A pandemic happened here in the United States, and many other parts of the world started to experience some serious problems because of COVID. And it was at this point that, you know, we're just trying to figure out, like, how serious is this pandemic? Is this going to affect our birth? At all my appointments, because at this point I think I was seeing my provider every other week, and I'm asking questions like, what do we need to be doing to be staying safe? My due date was April 16th, I believe, 2020. And so quickly approaching, given that we're in March and this pandemic is happening. So, you know, we're starting to distance ourselves from people like everyone else, but especially because I'm pregnant and we just don't know a lot about what COVID could do at this point. So we're taking all those precautions, but I'm starting to get a little worried because at that time I was working as a physical therapist at the hospital where I'm supposed to deliver my baby. And I'm feeling like there's like a lot of patients in the hospital with COVID, and I know how it works at this hospital. You deliver on one floor of the hospital, you're then transported to another floor of the hospital, and they're assuring me that, like, we're keeping distance between patients. We have COVID patients in a certain area, and I'm like, okay, I know they're doing everything they possibly can, but I just felt like I don't know if that's going to be enough for me. So since I had already looked into home birth before, I started looking into it a little bit more at this point, and I started looking into what are my midwife options for home birth. There were a couple of things that my husband was really nervous about that made him not want to do home birth, and to be completely honest, they were nerve-wracking for me too. The biggest thing for him was, what if there's a postpartum hemorrhage for me, which basically means I start bleeding, and it's so much bleeding that women die from postpartum hemorrhage. It's a very, very serious thing that can happen to women after they have their babies. So it's very serious, and rightly so, that he was really nervous about it. So that was one of our big concerns. And then the other concern is, like, what if the cord gets wrapped around baby during delivery and something happens to our baby? And of course, neither of us want that at all. So I start talking to midwives, and I asking them to send me research, and we start finding out that really the risk for mom and baby aren't as bad as you might think at home. So what I mean by that is, if you're a research person, there's research out there that says home birth is a safer option in the United States, and then there's other research out there that says hospital birth is a safer option for moms in the US. And it's like both of these research studies were done around the same time, and you're wondering, how did they come up with different results? And it all has to do with who did the research and what they were looking at, and there's a lot of factors to research besides, like, what they found. You need to, like, consider your own circumstances, I guess. For me, I knew that I had not a complicated pregnancy. I did not have gestational diabetes. I didn't have hypertension. Everything was good with, like, placenta, all the ultrasounds and checkups. Heart rates were all fine. I didn't have a postpartum hemorrhage with my first son. I was not older. It's not considered a geriatric pregnancy. I hate that term. But I'm in the young range, I guess, and so that wasn't a concern. So overall, I'm just a very low risk pregnancy. Only one baby. That's another thing that could make you high risk, is if you're, pregnant with multiples, or you've had fertility treatments. Already we're like, okay, my risk is pretty low. And the other thing with postpartum hemorrhage is that you need to have a blood transfusion. That's like, and procedures done to stop the bleeding. And one of the biggest things they say is there a major hospital hospital with a blood supply within 20 minutes of where you live. And thankfully, where we were living at the time, we had access to 2 hospitals, actually more than that, but 2 major hospitals within that 20-minute radius. So if something did go south, we could definitely get there very quickly. And then the other thing was about the cord. This is a myth that I feel like a lot of people believe, is that when the cord is wrapped around the baby, that's imminent danger for the baby. Like, they're gonna turn out to have a lot of birth defects because of the cord being wrapped. Now, while it is true that you can get birth defects if the cord is wrapped and cuts off blood supply, it's actually less likely that a cord being wrapped is gonna cause any damage at all. And what you're gonna do during your birth is the midwife or OBGYN or whoever's with you is gonna be monitoring baby's heart rate, and they're gonna make sure that everything sounds good the whole time. When it doesn't sound good, then we start to think, okay, maybe contractions are like pulling on that cord and baby's in distress. And actually, this is really interesting. With our first son, when he was born, I pushed and like his head kept coming out, but then he just kept like going back in. I'm like, oh my goodness, like just get this baby out, right? If you've ever been in that pushing phase, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And what they found when he finally came out far enough is she lifted the cord up over his head, and then he literally flew out. He came out so fast, my husband said. But it was because the cord was holding him back. So the cord was around his neck, but it wasn't doing any damage. His neck isn't actually how he's breathing. He's breathing through the cord. So if the cord is being pinched, that's a medical emergency. But just for the cord to be around his neck, he's not actually breathing like through his lungs and through his nose until he's delivered. And OBGYNs, midwives, they know how to bring that cord around or cut it if necessary to make sure that baby can be delivered safe. So actually, cord being wrapped isn't as imminent danger as was once thought. So I'll let you do your own research on that. But that was one thing that brought us a lot of peace of like, okay, this is one of the major complications we were worried about, but it's actually not as much of a concern as we had thought. And the third thing that pretty much sealed the deal for us was that our midwife, or one of the midwives that worked at the practice I was going to deliver my baby with, actually had a side business where she did home births. So I was going to be able to keep my same midwife that I was planning to deliver with, or one of the 4 that could have delivered my baby, was going to be able to be the one to deliver my baby at home. Now, she was a certified nurse midwife, which made my husband feel really good because their training is that they're a nurse first, then they go through midwifery school. There's actually 3 different ways that you can be considered a midwife, and the certified nurse midwife is what my husband felt the most comfortable with, and I felt really comfortable because I had already met her and had appointments with her. And I think that's something so important if you're going to have a home birth, is that you're working with a provider that you really trust. And something I also really valued was that when I talked to my midwives that were going to deliver at the hospital, they said, hey, like, there are some midwives in the area that don't have the best reputation because not all midwives are created equal, and so you might want to like steer clear of these ones, but these ones, you know, they get our stamp of approval, if you will. And as it turned out, one of those midwives was someone I was already seeing. So that was like the ideal situation, especially switching at 38 weeks, because by 38 weeks, I could have my baby any day now. Knowing my personal history, I figured I was gonna go late since my son was born 11 days late. But theoretically speaking, it could have happened at any day. And so you really want to have a relationship with that person, because that relationship and what they know about you is the best way to keep your baby safe during delivery. So that was a huge plus for us. So as it turned out, we were able to have a couple appointments with these midwives at our house. We got to meet her assistant and get to know like how the process was going to work. My husband had to hurry very quickly and gather everything we were going to need from the stores or Amazon if it could be there in 2 days, which again, it's a pandemic, so there was a shortage, and that's a whole nother story. But we did get the main things that we needed. I did decide that I really didn't need to have a water birth. I just wanted to have like a traditional birth in my bed, and so that it was how we ended up delivering my son. He was born at 40 weeks 4 days, I believe, which was such a relief to me because after my first experience, I was like, oh man, this could be, this could be a long waiting period after my due date, but thankfully it was only a few days. And so I will go ahead and link my full birth story above, where I go into all the details, but he ended up being quite a big boy. He was 9 pounds, 3 ounces, and yes, I delivered him vaginally at home, no medication. It was a wonderful experience. I had like a little teeny tear. They didn't end up even doing stitches for, so grade 1 if you know anything about how they grade tears and episiotomies, but very small. And my healing was so different. I still rested because I know as a physical therapist and from the advice of my midwives that resting is really important. Here in the United States especially, we just feel this need to be productive all the time and like, okay, you better be doing laundry and dishes and taking care of your toddler like the day after you deliver your baby. This is totally not necessary. To be completely honest, my body felt like I could have done a lot of those things. I felt really good. Totally different than I felt after my first birth. And by 6 weeks postpartum, I was totally ready to have intercourse again. And I started exercising. Well, you guys, if you've been around this channel, you know that I don't think you should wait until 6 weeks to start exercising, but I do know you shouldn't be doing vigorous exercise before then. So if you want more information about that, you should definitely email me because I will tell you all about my philosophy on what is the right way to start exercising. But you basically start your first week and you are working up so that by 6 weeks postpartum, you can start doing a little bit more intense things. But I did that. I felt no problem doing that, which was very different than my first postpartum experience. So all in all, I just loved my home birth experience. And if you are considering a home birth, I have a few tips I would love to share with you. So my first thing here is that it's really important that you and your partner are on board with the same plan. So whoever your support person is, you want them to be really comfortable with what you decide as well. So my husband needed a few questions answered. He wanted to know, what do they do if there's a postpartum hemorrhage? What do they do if there's a complication with baby can't be delivered? What are their stats as a business, like with the babies they've delivered? How many moms have had to transport to the hospital? How many babies have they lost? Have they lost any? He needed to know all that stuff, and I was really glad he was asking those questions because, to be honest, I was looking through it through rose-colored glasses a little bit, but he made sure that all those bases were covered, so in the end, he felt really comfortable with our decision as well. The second thing that I would say is to make sure it's a provider that you feel really comfortable with. This was a very weird scenario where it was really good, ended up being really good to transfer from hospital planned birth to a home birth at 38 weeks. But that would not have been the case if I didn't already know the midwife. Now, doing what I do as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I had connections with a few other midwives in the area that I would have felt really comfortable delivering with. Not that they had like been following my pregnancy per se, but they did know me as a person. I knew them, I knew like their values, what their procedures were. I just knew a lot about them, and I would have felt really comfortable delivering with them as well. But it is really important that you choose someone that you know has a good reputation, you know what their stats are, you know what their qualifications are, and that you just in general feel comfortable around them. You never want your birth to be surrounded by people that you don't feel comfortable with. So even if you're going with a hospital birth and you have an OBGYN and you're like, never really even like that OBGYN, you need to find a new provider, like you really do. And if there's multiple providers in your practice and they allow you to see different ones that could deliver your baby, I highly recommend this. With my first birth, I saw my favorite OBGYN every single time. And of course, when I went in to be induced, she was on vacation for the week. So there was no chance she was gonna be delivering my baby. And now I had to deliver my baby with someone I didn't even know or have any comfort with. So it's really cool if you can see different people in the practice and try to build relationship with any of the people that might be delivering your baby, because I truly believe that plays a huge role in how you feel during your delivery. And then the third thing is do your research. And I already kind of alluded to this, that there is so much bias in research, in my opinion. It depends who paid for the research. It depends, you know, what lens they were looking at. We try to keep research really unbiased, but we're human, and I'm sorry to say, but research is human as well. So it's important that you look at both sides. You play devil's advocate for everything. You look at all the factors, and you consider your own personal circumstances, your own personal beliefs. You do some critical thinking for yourself. You have all the information from the research, and then you decide what's best for you. Like I said, I was a low risk person. I knew that the odds were in my favor, if you will, and so this was a good scenario for me. But there might be someone that I meet that I'm like, that isn't the best scenario for them, and that would be something they would need to decide. I would love to know in the comments what questions you have about my home birth experience, or just home birth in general. And if you've been following this channel for any length of time and you either like that I shared a personal story, or you're like, just keep it to the facts, I like the educational stuff a lot better, I would love to know what you think about that as well. If you are a big fan of personal stories like this, I'm gonna go ahead and throw my son's birth story up here, where I go into a lot more detail about how everything happened, and I love birth stories, so that's where I would head next. But that's just me. For everyone else, thanks so much for joining me today, and I will see you all in the next video.